It was a bright Tuesday morning at JFK Airport, the kind of morning that made the city gleam. Sunlight reflected off the fuselages of waiting airplanes. Passengers hustled through the terminal with coffee in hand, and the aroma of baked goods mingled with jet fuel in a strangely comforting way. Among the crowd, 6-year-old Emma Carson clutched her mother's hand tightly. Her brown eyes were wide with excitement, scanning the massive jet before them. She had always loved airplanes, always insisted she'd fly one day. Today, she was going to Denver with her mother, and her imagination ran wild with thoughts of soaring above clouds, looking down at the patchwork of the world below. The boarding process was routine, almost dull, until Emma noticed the pilot through the small cockpit window. His face was calm, eyes focused, completely unaware of the storm about to descend. To Emma, he looked like a superhero in uniform, someone who commanded the sky with ease. She leaned on her mother, whispering, "Mom, I'm going to learn all the buttons someday." Her mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face, thinking it was just another one of her daughter's innocent flights of fancy. The passengers filed in, businessmen scrolling on phones, families with children clutching stuffed animals, elderly couples murmuring about the weather. Flight attendants moved like clockwork, directing travelers to their seats, stowing bags in overhead compartments. The plane hummed with life, the engines beginning to roar as the jet taxied down the runway. Emma felt a thrill of anticipation, her small fingers tapping against her mother's arm. The takeoff was smooth, and soon, the cabin filled with the gentle vibration of altitude gain, passengers settling in for what was supposed to be a routine flight. The first hour passed with the monotony of cruising altitude. Emma stared out the window, imagining herself as the pilot, navigating clouds and controlling a machine that seemed almost alive. She traced patterns on the glass with her finger, imagining the runway far below shrinking into the distance. But just as she was settling into her daydream, a sudden, violent jolt shook the plane. Coffee sloshed in cups, phones slipped from laps, and a low groan of metal echoed through the fuselage. Emma's mother looked toward the cockpit, a frown creasing her forehead. The captain, once upright and calm, now slumped forward, his body limp against the yoke. Emma froze, her heart thudding in her chest. Panic rippled across the cabin like a sudden gust of wind, and the hum of engines seemed to falter for a moment. Flight attendants rushed toward the cockpit, shouting over the sudden cries of passengers. "Is anyone trained?" one yelled, panic creeping into her voice. The first wave of chaos hit Emma in a tangible way. Children screamed, parents clutched their own in desperation, and a man in the row ahead vomited over the armrest. But in the middle of the hysteria, Emma felt a strange calm wash over her. Something inside her clicked, a memory of a children's aviation book she had studied endlessly, where diagrams of buttons and levers were labeled meticulously. She knew somehow that she could help. "I can help," she whispered, tugging on her mother's sleeve. Her voice was soft but insistent, cutting through the chaos. Her mother's eyes widened, disbelief and terror battling in her gaze. "Honey, you're just a kid," she stammered, but even in her panic she hesitated. There was a spark in Emma's eyes that was impossible to ignore, a mixture of determination, intelligence, and courage that seemed far beyond her 6 years. The flight attendants were now at the cockpit door, banging and shouting, but the lock wouldn't budge. The captain remained unresponsive, his body slumping further against the yoke with every passing second. Oxygen masks had dropped, and passengers were beginning to panic more intensely. Emma felt a surge of determination. She climbed onto the edge of her seat, peering through the cockpit window. Her fingers traced the outlines of the instruments she had memorized from her book: the yoke, the throttle, the autopilot panel. Each image she had studied over countless afternoons came flooding back. "Mom, I can do it," Emma said again, her voice gaining strength. Her mother shook her head, tears brimming. "Sweetheart, you're just a little girl." But Emma wasn't swayed. She felt a strange clarity, a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. She placed her hands on the yoke, feeling its weight, imagining the diagrams she had traced so many times in her mind. Somehow, she knew what needed to be done, even if she couldn't fully articulate it. Meanwhile, the passengers were in full panic mode. Someone grabbed a blanket to cover their eyes, a man muttered prayers under his breath, and others attempted to call family members, tears streaking their faces. Air traffic control crackled over the radio, voices tense and professional. Flight 472, altitude 15,000, are you receiving? Static filled the cabin as no one could respond. The realization hit the passengers like a hammer. No one was controlling the plane. Emma's mother watched, heart pounding, as her daughter moved closer to the cockpit. She could barely comprehend what was happening. Her 6-year-old was stepping into the seat of a life-and-death situation. But Emma's eyes were focused, unwavering. The autopilot button was a blur of shapes and colors she had studied countless times in her book. Trembling, she pressed it. Slowly, miraculously, the plane steadied, its violent tremors softening. The passengers gasped, some whispering prayers of disbelief, others staring in awe at the tiny figure at the controls. Emma's mother wrapped an arm around her daughter, holding her tightly as if to shield her from the magnitude of what she had done. But Emma's mind was already racing ahead, thinking of what would come next. The turbulence continued, and a faint warning beep echoed from the panel. She had stabilized the plane for now, but she knew this was only the beginning. Above the roar of the engines and the frightened cries, Emma's voice was small but clear. "I'm flying the plane. I can do this." The cabin fell silent for a heartbeat, passengers frozen in shock and disbelief. Some whispered among themselves, unsure whether to scream, pray, or faint. Flight attendants exchanged glances, their professional facades cracking as the reality sank in. A 6-year-old girl was now in control of Flight 472, 15,000 feet above the ground. And in that suspended moment, the world seemed to pause. Outside, clouds scudded past the windows, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside. Emma felt a strange sense of calm amid the chaos. She knew she had to keep going, to hold the plane steady until someone could guide her, until they could land safely. And deep down, she understood one terrifying truth. If she failed, there would be no second chance. Her mother squeezed her hand, whispering a shaky, "You can do this, Emma." Emma nodded, eyes wide, heart pounding, gripping the yoke as if her life and everyone else's depended on it, because it did. The passengers braced themselves, the engines roared, and above it all, the small, determined voice of a 6-year-old girl began the impossible task of flying a jet. The cabin was a storm of panic. Passengers clutched each other, some shaking, some praying aloud. Flight attendants moved frantically, trying to manage the chaos, but the reality was undeniable. The captain was unconscious, the co-pilot absent, and a 6-year-old girl had climbed into the cockpit. It was a scene that would have seemed impossible even in the most dramatic Hollywood film, but it was real. Emma's tiny hands rested on the controls, trembling yet determined. The autopilot had stabilized the plane slightly, but turbulence rocked the aircraft, rattling every compartment, every overhead bin. Emma's heart raced, her small body taut with concentration. She remembered the diagrams in her book: yoke, throttle, rudder pedals, radio. She had memorized every label, every button, every switch in hours of obsessive study. And now, somehow, that knowledge mattered more than anyone could imagine. Her mother knelt beside her, panic written across her face. "Emma, you're just a child. You can't." "I can, Mom," Emma interrupted, her voice small but unwavering. "I know what to do. I'll listen. I'll follow instructions. We'll be okay." The radio crackled, cutting through the deafening tension of the cabin. A calm, professional voice came through, static-laced but clear. "Flight 472, this is Denver Tower. We have you on radar. Can you respond?" Emma's hands shook as she pressed the microphone button. I'm flying," she said, her voice quivering. "The pilot, he's unconscious. Please help." A silence followed, broken only by the faint roar of the engines. Then the voice returned, firm but steady. "Flight 472, stay calm. We're guiding you. Listen carefully, and you will get the plane down safely." Emma's mother gripped her daughter's shoulders. "Did he just say they're going to help?" she whispered. Emma nodded, though her own fear was rising like a tidal wave. She could feel the weight of every soul on the plane pressing down on her small shoulders. She could see the faces of other passengers, wide-eyed and pale, some murmuring prayers, others frozen with disbelief. She felt a strange mixture of terror and focus. The plane wasn't just an object now. It was a responsibility. Each lever, each dial, each button could mean the difference between life and death. The turbulence worsened and the plane shuddered violently. Emma's fingers clenched the yoke as the seatbelt sign chimed again, the overhead bins rattling with the movement of luggage. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "we have to keep it steady. They said, stay on course." "Course, course," her mother repeated, trying to anchor herself in the instructions, though fear made her voice tremble. Passengers were now hyper-aware of the cockpit window, some craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the tiny pilot at the helm. Whispers spread like wildfire. "It's a child. She's actually flying the plane." Others muttered prayers, some gripping their seats until knuckles turned white. The reality of the situation was staggering. A 6-year-old had assumed control of a commercial airliner at 15,000 feet. "Emma," a flight attendant said, leaning into the aisle, "you're doing fine. Just do what they tell you." Emma nodded. Her hands moved toward the radio again, pressing the button with shaking fingers. "Denver Tower," she said. I'm trying. What do I do next?" The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "Maintain your altitude at 15,000. Adjust throttle to 70%. We'll guide you through the approach to the airport. You can do this. Keep the plane level." Emma's fingers moved over the throttle lever, recalling the diagram from her book. She adjusted it as instructed, heart hammering in her chest. The plane responded, engines humming more steadily. A sense of cautious hope flickered inside her, a fragile flame amid the chaos, but it was quickly drowned out by the realization that this was only the beginning. A passenger screamed as turbulence jolted the plane. Emma's mother hugged her daughter tightly, whispering frantic encouragement. "You can do it, Emma. Just listen to them." Emma nodded again, but inside, panic clawed at her. She could feel the plane shifting under her hands. Each small movement of the yoke sent a ripple through the fuselage. She had read about stalls, about nose dives, about spins. She had memorized diagrams, but she had never imagined she would face them in real life. The cockpit felt enormous and alien, every switch and dial a puzzle she had only solved in her imagination. Then came the first real test. A warning light blinked red on the console. Emma's stomach dropped. She had no idea what it meant: engine trouble, low fuel, something she had never encountered in her diagrams. She pressed a few buttons instinctively, recalling images from her book. The plane shuddered but did not plummet. She exhaled slowly, barely daring to move. Outside, clouds scudded past, white and fluffy, oblivious to the crisis inside the cabin. Emma could see nothing but sky, a vast, endless expanse stretching above and below. Inside, passengers were now staring at one another, some crying silently, others frozen in disbelief. A flight attendant moved through the aisle, checking on the injured and scared, whispering reassurances, though her own hands shook. Emma's mother whispered, "You're incredible, Emma, incredible." But even she could not hide the terror in her eyes. Emma looked back at the radio, pressing the button again. "Denver Tower, I'm holding it steady. What next?" The voice returned, calm but insistent. "Adjust heading 10 degrees north. Reduce speed to 220 knots. Watch your altitude. We'll guide you the rest of the way." Emma nodded, repeating the instructions in her mind. She adjusted the yoke slowly, carefully, the plane responding with gentle movements. She lowered the throttle to reduce speed. Every second was a battle, a calculation she had never been trained to make. And yet she did it. Somehow she kept the plane level, stable, alive. The passengers began to whisper among themselves, disbelief mingling with awe. Some had begun filming with their phones, capturing the impossible sight of a 6-year-old at the controls. Mothers whispered to their children, "Look, she's saving us." Fathers stared with wide eyes, unable to comprehend the courage unfolding before them. Suddenly, another jolt shook the plane. The turbulence intensified. Drinks spilled, luggage shifted, and the oxygen masks bounced slightly. Emma's small fingers dug into the yoke, knuckles white. Her mind raced, her heart pounding. She glanced at the slumped captain, then at the radio, and whispered, I can do this. I will do this. And in that moment, a strange calm settled over her. All fear, all panic seemed to fade into focus. She had a mission. She had a purpose. She had to save every single person on this plane. Air traffic control's voice came through again, steady and guiding. Flight 472, you're doing fine. Keep holding. Stay calm. You will land safely. Trust yourself. Emma exhaled, a small spark of courage lighting her eyes. She could do this, she had to. Every life on this plane depended on her. But as the plane continued to tremble and the passengers clutched their seats in terror, a new fear crept in. What if the autopilot failed? What if she made a wrong turn? What if the city lights of Denver below didn't lead to the runway? The answer was unknown, the outcome uncertain. And yet Emma pressed on. The plane soared on, 15,000 feet above the ground, steered by a 6-year-old girl who had somehow become the last line of defense between life and death. Emma's small hands gripped the yoke with white-knuckled intensity. The autopilot had stabilized the plane, but turbulence continued to rock the fuselage. Outside, clouds scudded past, but inside, the cabin felt like a war zone. Drinks spilled, luggage tumbled from overhead bins, and frightened passengers clutched each other, their knuckles pale and eyes wide with terror. Flight attendants moved rapidly down the aisles, whispering instructions and offering small comforts, but their professional composure masked the fear they all felt. Emma's mother knelt beside her, holding her daughter's hands tightly. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Emma, you're doing it, but what comes next? What do you do now?" Emma's mind raced. She remembered a chapter in her book about radios and communication with ground control. She reached for the microphone, pressing the button with trembling fingers. "Denver Tower, this is Flight 472, I'm flying," she stammered. "The captain is unconscious, please help." A static-filled voice responded, calm but urgent. "Flight 472, we read you. Listen carefully. We will guide you through each maneuver. First, maintain your altitude at 15,000 feet. Adjust your heading to 270. Keep the plane level. You can do this." Emma nodded, even though no one could see her. The yoke felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, each movement critical. She adjusted the heading, small movements of the yoke translating into delicate shifts of the aircraft. Passengers watched in stunned silence, some whispering prayers, others frozen with disbelief. The realization hit them slowly, like a stone dropped into water. A 6-year-old was flying a commercial jet. Turbulence intensified, slamming the plane side to side. The overhead bins rattled, coffee sloshed, and a few unsteady passengers fell against seatbacks. Emma's stomach lurched. She remembered the section in her book about stalls, how the nose could pitch down, the plane could spin, and lives could be lost in seconds. Her fingers clenched the yoke harder. She had never practiced this in real life, and yet somehow she had to do it now. "Throttle, adjust throttle," she muttered to herself, recalling the diagram. With trembling fingers, she moved the lever as ATC had instructed. The plane responded, the engines humming steadily. A flicker of hope ignited in her chest, but she forced herself to focus. One wrong move, and the lives of everyone on board could end in an instant. The radio crackled again. "Flight 472, there's a flock of birds ahead. You need to maintain your altitude and make a slight right adjustment. You can do this." Emma's pulse surged. Birds? At this altitude? Panic brushed her small body, but she remembered what her mother had said. Stay calm, focus. Listen. She turned the yoke slightly to the right, heart pounding as the aircraft swerved delicately to avoid the invisible danger. The passengers gasped, some clinging to each other, some holding their phones out as if documenting the impossible miracle. Her mother whispered, "Emma, you're incredible, I can't believe this." Her words were drowned out by the roar of engines and the cries of frightened passengers, but Emma heard them clearly. She focused on the voice of ATC, each instruction a lifeline in the chaos. Reduce speed to 220 knots. Prepare for descent in 10 minutes. Stay calm. We'll guide you step by step. Emma adjusted the throttle again, reducing speed. She could feel the plane respond under her small hands. The cabin vibrated with every adjustment, and passengers were gripping the armrests, staring at the cockpit window as though it held the answer to every prayer ever whispered. Flight attendants moved quickly, offering blankets, helping terrified children, whispering that everything would be fine. But it was not fine. Emma knew the gravity of the situation. She could see the captain, still unconscious, his body slumped forward. The co-pilot had been called away before departure for a minor medical issue. It had all aligned in the most terrifying way possible, the sole person in control incapacitated, and the plane in the hands of a child who had never flown anything beyond a simulator book. The first real panic hit when a warning light flashed on the console. Red. Emma froze, stomach twisting. She remembered reading about warning lights, but the diagrams were just pictures. They did not teach her what panic felt like, what it felt like to hold 150 people's lives in her hands. Trembling, she pressed a few buttons instinctively. The plane steadied. Somehow she had stabilized it. She exhaled, barely daring to move. Passengers whispered among themselves, some crying, some murmuring disbelief. One man muttered, "She's a hero, a little angel in the cockpit." Others remained frozen, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Children stared at Emma through the glass, eyes wide with wonder. Emma's own mind raced, adrenaline and fear fueling her focus. She had to follow the instructions, maintain the plane, and prepare for descent. Another jolt of turbulence shook the aircraft. Emma's mother gripped her tightly. "You can do this, Emma, you must." Emma pressed the radio again. "Denver Tower, I'm holding steady. What next?" Flight 472, reduce speed gradually. Adjust flaps to 10 degrees. We will guide you for approach. You're doing fine, keep calm. Emma nodded, focusing every fiber of her being. She adjusted the flaps slowly, watching as the plane responded with delicate precision. The engines roared steadily, a testament to her careful handling. She was terrified, yes, but a strange confidence had begun to emerge. She was not imagining control, she was controlling, and for the moment the impossible was possible. The passengers' whispers began to shift, or replaced panic. One flight attendant murmured, "I can't believe a 6-year-old is flying this plane." Another shook her head in disbelief. Even the adults, hardened by years of routine and travel, were silenced by the courage of the tiny figure at the controls. Emma glanced at the captain again, his body still slack against the yoke. She realized the truth. She couldn't rely on him. There was no second line of defense. The responsibility was hers and hers alone. The realization made her stomach drop, but it also sharpened her focus. She had to stay steady, breathe, and follow instructions. ATC's voice returned, calm and guiding. Flight 472, maintain current heading. Prepare for turn to final approach in 5 minutes. You are doing excellent. Stay with us. Emma nodded, heart pounding. She could feel the plane responding to her hands, subtle adjustments translating into a steady glide. The chaos in the cabin continued, passengers whispering and clutching, but somehow she felt a strange control over the storm. She had stabilized the impossible. She had survived the first wave of panic. But deep down, she knew the worst was yet to come. Descent, approach, landing. That was when the real challenge would begin. One wrong move, one miscalculated turn, and the miracle of survival could vanish in an instant. Emma exhaled, a small, determined smile forming on her lips. She was scared, but she was ready. And as the plane continued its steady glide 15,000 feet above the earth, she whispered to herself, "I can do this. I have to." The voice of ATC came again, calm but urgent. "Flight 472, the airport is ahead. Prepare for final approach. You are not alone." And in that moment, Emma realized the true weight of what she was about to face. The impossible was not over. The final test was coming. Emma's small hands gripped the yoke as the plane began its slow, cautious descent. The engines hummed steadily under her control, but turbulence still rattled the fuselage, sending jolts through the aircraft that made coffee spill and luggage clatter from overhead bins. The cabin had transformed into a mixture of chaos and awe. Passengers clutched each other, whispering prayers, while others stared with wide-eyed disbelief at the tiny pilot at the helm. Her mother knelt beside her, holding her hands tightly. "Emma, listen carefully. Keep the plane level. Follow what they say." Her voice trembled, a mixture of fear and reverence. Emma nodded, her lips pressed tightly together, eyes locked on the instruments before her. The radio crackled, carrying the calm but urgent voice of air traffic control. "Flight 472, you're doing very well. Keep altitude at 12,000 feet. Reduce speed gradually to 200 knots. Prepare for approach to runway 27L. We will guide you step by step. Trust yourself." Emma's small fingers moved over the throttle, reducing speed as instructed. She adjusted the yoke slightly to maintain level flight, her heart pounding with every adjustment. The plane responded, gliding steadily despite the turbulence. A flicker of hope surged within her. She had stabilized the impossible. Yet, fear still gnawed at her. One misstep could turn a miracle into disaster. Passengers whispered among themselves, their voices a mix of awe and disbelief. "It's a child," one woman murmured, clutching her husband's arm. "She's actually flying the plane." Others remained frozen, unable to comprehend the courage unfolding before them. Some were crying quietly, while others had pulled out phones, capturing footage of a story no one would ever forget. Emma pressed the radio again. "Denver Tower, I'm reducing speed, preparing to follow your instructions for approach." Her voice was small but steady. The response came immediately, calm and authoritative. "Good work, Flight 472. Keep it steady. Begin a gentle turn to heading 285. Adjust flaps to 15 degrees. We'll guide you through each step." Emma followed the instructions carefully, her tiny hands moving over the controls with painstaking precision. The plane responded with gentle shifts, tilting slightly as she turned. Her heart raced. She could see the runway ahead in the distance, a faint ribbon of light stretching across the darkening landscape, but the city below seemed impossibly far. The descent would be tricky, every movement critical. Suddenly, turbulence jolted the aircraft violently, throwing a woman's purse across the aisle and sending a tray of coffee flying. Emma's fingers tightened on the yoke, knuckles white. Her mother held her close, whispering encouragement. "You can do this, Emma. Just listen to them. Stay calm." Emma nodded. She had to stay calm. She had to follow instructions. Every life on this plane, including her own, depended on her. She pressed the radio again. "Denver Tower, I'm ready for the next step." "Flight 472, reduce altitude gradually. Keep the plane level. You're doing excellent. Adjust flaps slowly as we guide you toward final approach." Emma obeyed, slowly lowering the plane's altitude. Her hands moved carefully over the yoke, feeling the aircraft respond under her touch. The cabin creaked and vibrated as they descended through turbulent layers of clouds. Passengers gasped as the city below came into view. Lights sparkled like a field of stars, but the runway still seemed impossibly far away. Flight attendants whispered reassurances, though their eyes betrayed the tension they felt. "You're doing fine," one said, moving down the aisle to comfort passengers. "Just keep steady." Emma's mother held her daughter tightly. "You're incredible, Emma. I can't believe this." Her voice cracked with emotion. Emma didn't respond. Her focus was absolute. One miscalculation now, one wrong maneuver, and the descent could turn catastrophic. Her small hands were steady, but her heart pounded with every shift of the aircraft. Suddenly, a warning beep echoed from the console. A flickering light indicated minor engine irregularity. Emma froze, stomach twisting. She remembered reading about emergency lights and alarms in her aviation book, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of facing one. Trembling, she pressed the corresponding switch, recalling the diagram she had studied for hours. The light extinguished. The plane responded, steady once again. Passengers exhaled collectively, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Some whispered prayers, others clutched their loved ones, and a few recorded the unbelievable event unfolding in real time. One man murmured, She's saving us." Emma glanced at the slumped captain, his body still motionless. She realized with a pang that she was entirely alone in her responsibility. No one else could intervene. She had become the sole guardian of Flight 472. The weight of the task pressed down on her small shoulders, yet she refused to falter. Air traffic control's voice came again, calm and guiding. "Flight 472, prepare for final approach. Begin gentle descent to 10,000 feet. You're doing excellent. Keep the plane level, maintain speed, and follow our instructions step by step." Emma followed the instructions, adjusting the throttle and yoke carefully. The plane's descent was smooth but nerve-wracking, each moment a battle against fear and gravity. She could see the runway approaching, faint but visible, a lifeline in the darkness. Her heart raced. She pressed forward, trusting the guidance of the professionals on the radio and her own instincts. Suddenly, turbulence hit again, stronger than before. Passengers screamed, clutching their seats, some falling against each other. The plane tilted slightly and Emma's stomach lurched. Her fingers tightened on the yoke, forcing the aircraft back to level flight. Her mother whispered, "You're doing it, Emma, you're really doing it." Emma exhaled, trying to focus. One step at a time, adjust altitude, adjust speed, follow instructions, keep the plane level. The runway lights ahead grew brighter, a promise of hope. The radio crackled. "Flight 472, reduce speed gradually. Begin flare for landing. You've got this. Steady hands, steady mind, almost there." Emma's pulse surged. The final challenge was upon her. Every instruction mattered. Every movement could mean life or death. She adjusted the throttle, felt the plane respond, and began the delicate maneuvering required for landing. The passengers watched in silence, disbelief and awe etched on every face. Her mother whispered once more, voice trembling, "You're amazing, Emma, the bravest person I know." Emma's focus sharpened. She felt every vibration, every gust of wind, every subtle tilt of the aircraft. The runway stretched ahead, closer now, still impossibly far. She pressed the radio again, seeking guidance. "Denver Tower, I'm ready to land." "Flight 472, steady now. Keep aligned with the runway, you are doing incredible. Almost there, almost safe." Emma's hands moved with precision, tiny fingers adjusting the yoke and throttle, translating every instruction into life-saving action. Every passenger held their breath, every heart pounded in unison. The runway grew larger, brighter, closer. Every second stretched into eternity. And somewhere deep inside, Emma knew that the impossible could still become reality, but only if she stayed calm, focused, and fearless. The plane shuddered once more, a final jolt of turbulence, and the next moments would decide everything. The runway lights of Denver grew brighter through the cockpit windows, a ribbon of gold against the deepening twilight. Emma's small hands gripped the yoke as Flight 472 continued its slow, precarious descent. The engines hummed steadily, but the plane trembled slightly with every gust of wind. Each vibration, each subtle shift of the aircraft, demanded her complete attention. She could feel every movement in her fingers, every reaction of the plane under her tiny hands. Her mother knelt beside her, clutching her tightly, whispering encouragement through tears. "Emma, you can do this. I know you can, just stay calm." Emma's lips pressed tightly together. Fear gnawed at her, but she forced herself to focus. Every passenger, every life on board rested in her hands. She had never imagined that a 6-year-old could be responsible for so many lives, yet somehow she had no choice. The plane was her responsibility now, and failure was not an option. The radio crackled to life, the calm but urgent voice of air traffic control cutting through the tension. Flight 472, reduce speed to 180 knots. Begin final alignment with runway 27L. Keep flaps at 20 degrees. You're doing excellent. Steady hands, steady mind. Emma nodded, her tiny fingers adjusting the throttle and yoke. The aircraft responded smoothly, gliding down toward the runway. Turbulence still rattled the fuselage, tossing drinks, jostling overhead bins, and sending luggage skidding. Passengers clutched each other, some frozen in disbelief, others whispering prayers. The flight attendants moved swiftly down the aisles, calming frightened children, offering blankets and whispering encouragement, though their own eyes betrayed the terror they felt. Emma's heart pounded as the runway grew closer, its lights like guiding stars in the approaching darkness. She pressed the radio again. Denver Tower, I'm ready for final descent. I'm holding steady. Flight 472, keep steady. Align with the runway. Adjust descent gradually. You're doing incredible, almost there. Emma followed the instructions carefully, adjusting her descent in small, precise movements. She felt the subtle shift of the yoke beneath her fingers, the delicate pull of the aircraft as it responded to her adjustments. The plane tilted slightly as she made small corrections, keeping it aligned perfectly with the runway. The runway lights stretched below like a lifeline, a promise that the impossible might actually succeed. Suddenly, turbulence hit harder than before, jolting the aircraft violently. A scream pierced the cabin, blending with the roar of engines and the terrified murmurs of passengers. Coffee spilled, bags tumbled from overhead compartments, and the plane shuddered as if testing Emma's resolve. Her mother gripped her shoulders, whispering urgently, "Stay steady. You've got this, Emma. Just follow their instructions." Emma's hands tightened on the yoke, knuckles white. She adjusted the throttle, nudged the flaps, and kept the plane level. Every small correction counted. Every second mattered. Passengers whispered among themselves, all mingling with fear. She's actually doing it," one woman murmured, clutching her husband's arm. The radio crackled again. Flight 472 flaps at 25 degrees. Reduce speed to 160 knots. Begin slight flare as you approach touchdown. Emma swallowed hard. She had memorized the diagrams, practiced the maneuvers in her mind countless times, but never in real life, never with hundreds of lives hanging in the balance. She pressed the throttle carefully, adjusting the plane's descent. The aircraft responded. She exhaled, a flicker of hope warming her chest, but fear was never far behind. A passenger in the back began to cry, clutching a child to his chest. Others whispered prayers, some staring at the cockpit with wide eyes, unable to comprehend the small figure guiding the plane to safety. Emma could feel their hope, their fear, their lives intertwined with her own. Every decision, every movement of her hands mattered in ways she could barely understand. Suddenly, a flickering warning light blinked on the console. Emma's stomach lurched. She had memorized emergency procedures from her book, but real-life panic was far different. Trembling, she pressed the corresponding switch, hoping she had chosen correctly. The light extinguished. The plane remained steady. She exhaled, barely daring to move. "Keep it steady," she whispered to herself, eyes locked on the runway ahead. "You've got this." The radio crackled again. Flight 472 final approach. Keep wings level, adjust throttle gradually. Touch down gently, you are almost there. You are doing incredible. Emma nodded, focusing on every subtle movement of the plane. The engines roared steadily, the runway lights stretching closer. Turbulence still rattled the plane, but she adjusted her hands, small but precise movements, keeping the aircraft aligned. The passengers watched, some frozen, some whispering prayers, some in tears. Every life on board depended on her, and she refused to fail. Her mother held her tightly, whispering, "Almost there, Emma, almost there." The runway lights grew larger, clearer. Emma adjusted her descent, carefully nudging the plane forward. The engines responded smoothly. The flaps were at 25 degrees, the plane perfectly aligned. She pressed the throttle slightly, the aircraft gliding with precision. Suddenly the plane shuddered violently. Another gust of turbulence and coffee flew across the aisle. A child screamed. Emma's heart raced, but she refused to panic. Her hands tightened on the yoke, tiny fingers guiding the plane inch by inch. "Almost there," she whispered again, the words a mantra. "You can do this. You have to." The radio voice came again, calm but urgent. "Flight 472, you're doing it. Steady now, touchdown in seconds. Trust yourself." Emma's pulse surged. Every passenger held their breath. Every heart pounded in unison. The runway lights stretched below, closer than ever. She pressed the throttle carefully, guiding the plane down with precise adjustments. The wheels were almost there. And then, a moment of sheer terror, she saw a flock of birds on the runway ahead, illuminated by the lights. Her stomach lurched. Panic flared, but she remembered what ATC had said: stay calm, focus, adjust. She nudged the yoke slightly, swerving the plane just enough to avoid disaster. The birds scattered and the plane remained steady. Passengers screamed in relief, some clinging to each other, others staring in disbelief. Emma exhaled slowly, tiny hands trembling but still guiding the aircraft. The runway stretched out beneath them, illuminated and real. "Touchdown, touchdown in 3, 2, 1, ATC's voice instructed. Emma pressed the throttle, felt the wheels connect with the asphalt, bouncing once, twice, then rolling steadily. Cheers erupted throughout the cabin. Some passengers cried, some hugged, some laughed in disbelief. But Emma didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the cockpit floor, fearing the captain, fearing a final catastrophe. Her mother hugged her tightly, tears streaming. You did it, Emma." The plane rolled down the runway, engines humming steadily, passengers breathing in unison, hearts still pounding. Emma's small hands released the yoke slowly, almost afraid to let go. She had done the impossible. But even as relief washed over the cabin, a shadow of fear remained. The emergency wasn't over until the plane came to a complete stop, and somewhere deep inside, Emma knew there could be more challenges ahead, one she hadn't yet imagined. The plane's tires screeched softly as Flight 472 rolled to a gradual stop on the runway. A wave of stunned silence washed through the cabin, passengers frozen in disbelief. Slowly, hesitant cheers began to ripple through the aisles, clapping, laughter, and tears mingling into an outpouring of emotion. Many were still gripping their loved ones, unable to believe what they had just survived. A 6-year-old girl had flown a commercial airliner, guided only by her courage and the voices of air traffic control. Emma remained at the yoke, her tiny hands shaking. She had done it, but the adrenaline still coursed through her veins. She glanced at the slumped captain whose head lolled limply against the controls. He was alive but unconscious, and the flight attendants rushed to check on him. Emma's mother wrapped her arms around her daughter, tears streaming down her face. You saved all of us, Emma," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Emma could hardly respond. Her mind was spinning, her heart pounding, the enormity of what she had accomplished barely sinking in. She had flown a plane. She had navigated turbulence, adjusted the yoke, throttles, and flaps. She had avoided disaster and delivered everyone safely to the ground. And yet, she was just a child. The realization of how extraordinary the moment had been began to overwhelm her. Passengers began to rise from their seats, some cautiously approaching Emma and her mother. "You're amazing," one man said, voice shaking. "You saved us all." Children stared with wide eyes, some offering small drawings or toys as gifts of gratitude. A flight attendant knelt down beside Emma, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You were incredible," she said softly, awe evident in her voice. "I've never seen anything like it." The cabin erupted in a mixture of celebration and relief. Some passengers cried openly, hugging each other. Others whispered prayers of thanks. The atmosphere, once chaotic and frantic, had shifted into one of reverent awe. The story of a 6-year-old pilot was already taking shape in whispers and stunned conversations. But amid the relief, there was still concern. The captain remained unconscious, and emergency crews would need to board the plane immediately. Flight attendants directed passengers to remain seated as paramedics approached the cockpit. Emma's mother squeezed her daughter's hand, whispering, "It's not over yet, but you were perfect. You were perfect." Emma nodded, still processing the scene around her. The adrenaline had begun to fade, leaving a mixture of exhaustion, awe, and lingering fear. She could hear the murmur of emergency personnel outside the cockpit door, voices blending with the fatting hum of the engines. She had saved the flight, but now she had to let the professionals take over. As paramedics gently helped the captain from his seat, passengers clapped and cheered again, the sounds echoing in the fuselage. The realization hit Emma fully. She had done what no one expected, what no 6-year-old could have been imagined capable of. And yet here she was, alive, unharmed, and hailed as a hero. Airport officials arrived, moving quickly to assess the situation. The aircraft was secured and the crew began debriefing passengers. Some were still in shock, unable to articulate the sheer improbability of what they had witnessed. News crews outside were already filming, the story spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Cameras, microphones, and flashing lights awaited, and soon Emma's bravery would be broadcast to the world. Emma's mother held her tightly, feeling the weight of the moment. "You did something no one else could have done," she whispered. "You were brave, so brave." Emma's eyes welled with tears. She hadn't felt brave, she had only felt focused, guided by instinct and the instructions of the professionals on the radio. But she understood now that her actions had mattered, that she had prevented what could have been a tragedy. She had saved lives, and the world was beginning to recognize it. Passengers began to share stories of the moments that had terrified them, describing the turbulence, the sudden realization of the captain's unconsciousness, and the awe of watching a 6-year-old keep the plane stable. Flight attendants spoke quietly to each other, amazed at how the young girl had maintained control under such extreme pressure. One whispered, shaking her head, "I've trained for decades, and I've never seen anything like this." As the passengers exited the aircraft, crews and officials guided them safely to the terminal. The applause and cheers continued, echoing in the hangar. Emma walked alongside her mother, small hand clutching hers, surrounded by a throng of grateful passengers. Her eyes were wide, still absorbing the reality of what had just occurred. News crews and photographers began to swarm, their cameras capturing every detail of the small girl who had flown a plane. Reporters clamored for interviews, but Emma's mother gently shielded her, whispering, "We'll talk later. You've done enough for today." Outside, the lights of the airport glowed against the darkening sky. Emergency vehicles arrived, paramedics attending to the captain and ensuring the plane was secure. The media, already broadcasting live, began narrating the story. A 6-year-old girl has safely landed a commercial airliner after the pilot became incapacitated at 15,000 feet. Witnesses describe her courage as miraculous. Emma remained quiet, overwhelmed by the attention. She had been a hero, but she had acted out of instinct, knowledge, and focus, not for recognition. And yet the world was beginning to notice. Her small frame, clutching the hands of her mother, now stood as a symbol of courage beyond years. Inside the terminal, passengers hugged one another, sharing relief and gratitude. "I can't believe it," one man whispered. "She saved all of us. A child flying a plane." Others nodded, tears streaming down their faces. The story was already taking root in their memories, a tale of courage, focus, and the impossible made real. Airport security officials and the airline's crisis team approached Emma and her mother, offering congratulations and gentle support. "We need to make sure you're safe," one official said. "But you did something extraordinary, truly extraordinary." Emma's mother nodded, tears flowing freely. "She's just a child," she said, voice breaking. "But today she was everything." As Emma looked out the window at the runway behind her, she remembered the turbulence, the alarms, the lights, the voices on the radio. The fear had been real, the responsibility enormous, but she had done it. She had flown the plane, guided it safely, and saved hundreds of lives. Paramedics now led the captain away for evaluation. Passengers continued filing off the plane, offering small waves of gratitude, clapping, and murmured thanks to the girl who had become a hero in an impossible moment. Emma's mother whispered again, "You saved everyone today, Emma. Everyone." And Emma, still small, still just a child, allowed herself a small smile. The fear had passed. The chaos had subsided. She had faced the impossible and survived. But even in the calm, one thought lingered. How would the world react to what she had done? How would they see her? And would anyone truly understand the courage, the focus, and the sheer determination that a 6-year-old had summoned at 15,000 feet to save hundreds of lives? The answer was beginning to unfold, and Emma was at the center of it. By the time Emma and her mother had been escorted into a quiet area of the terminal, the airport was a whirlwind of activity. News crews, photographers, and reporters were gathering outside the hangar, eager to capture the story of a 6-year-old who had defied every expectation. The murmurs of astonished passengers had already spread online, their videos going viral within minutes. The world was watching, and Emma, small and trembling, was at the center of it. Her mother held her hand tightly, shielding her from the flashing cameras and the onslaught of voices. "Emma," she whispered, "you're safe now, but everyone wants to know how you did it, how you saved the plane." Emma's lips pressed together. She had acted instinctively, guided by what she had memorized in her book and the calm voices of air traffic control. She had never imagined anyone would care about how she had done it. She only knew she had to keep the plane stable, alive, moving toward the runway. In a corner, passengers who had witnessed the flight firsthand began arriving, still pale from fear but full of gratitude. One elderly man approached, his hands shaking. "Young lady, I don't even know your name, but you saved my life. You saved all of us. You are extraordinary." Emma's mother gently squeezed her daughter. "Emma, they want to thank you." Emma nodded quietly, barely meeting their eyes. She was overwhelmed. She had not expected cheers, applause, or admiration. She had only expected to survive, and to ensure that everyone else survived too. By now, airport officials had set up a temporary press area. Reporters jostled to get a glimpse, their cameras flashing, microphones poised. A local news anchor stepped forward, smiling warmly. "We're here with the 6-year-old girl who safely landed Flight 472 after the pilot became incapacitated. Can you tell us, how did you do it?" Emma glanced at her mother, seeking reassurance. Her mother smiled gently, whispering, "You can tell them just the truth." Taking a deep breath, Emma whispered, I just followed the instructions they gave me on the radio. I remembered what I read and I tried to keep the plane steady. That's all." The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted in admiration. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured, and a news crew outside was already broadcasting live. A 6-year-old child saved Flight 472. Witnesses describe her courage as nothing short of miraculous. She followed the guidance of air traffic control and successfully landed the plane, saving hundreds of lives. Passengers who had survived the flight began to speak, their voices shaky but filled with gratitude. She was incredible," one man said. "I've flown for decades and I've never seen anything like this. A 6-year-old flying a plane." Another woman nodded tearfully. "We owe her everything. She's our miracle." The story began spreading rapidly online. Tweets, posts, and videos circulated worldwide, all sharing the image of a small girl at the controls of a commercial airliner, her tiny hands gripping the yoke with precision and courage beyond her years. Media outlets everywhere scrambled to cover the story. Headlines flashed across screens. 6-year-old pilot saves hundreds in mid-air miracle. Child hero lands plane after pilot collapses. The youngest aviator in history. Emma's mother held her tightly, whispering, "You need to rest now, but everyone will know what you did." Emma's eyes, wide and brimming with tears, absorbed the attention. It was overwhelming, but she felt a quiet pride. She had acted out of necessity, guided by instinct and the words of professionals, but the gratitude, the awe, and the recognition were new to her. She had saved lives, and now the world was beginning to understand that. Emergency crews and airline officials approached, offering congratulations and gentle reassurances. One pilot, a veteran of decades, knelt to speak with Emma. "I've trained for years," he said, voice shaking with emotion, "and I've never seen courage like yours. You kept everyone alive, every single passenger. That's remarkable." Emma nodded quietly, too exhausted to speak, but the words sank in. She had done something extraordinary, something that defied logic, age, and expectation. She had faced the impossible and prevailed. Meanwhile, social media erupted. Videos of the tiny girl in the cockpit went viral within minutes. News outlets from around the world picked up the story, reporting her courage and composure. Experts weighed in, expressing awe at her calmness under pressure. Aviation forums buzzed with discussions about the unprecedented event. Comments ranged from disbelief to admiration, many questioning if they had ever seen anything like it. A 6-year-old successfully flying a commercial plane to safety. The airport coordinated interviews, though Emma's mother gently shielded her from excessive attention. She wanted her daughter to process what had happened before being swept into the whirlwind of fame. But even as she tried to protect Emma, the world was already reacting. One airline official, speaking to reporters, said, "Flight 472's safe landing is a testament to courage, focus, and quick thinking. This young girl's actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic tragedy. We are forever grateful." Emma's mother whispered again, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Do you understand, Emma? People are calling you a hero, a miracle." Emma blinked, processing the words. She had never thought of herself as a hero. She had only thought of keeping the plane level, following instructions, and keeping everyone alive. But the applause, the recognition, the grateful faces, it was overwhelming. Outside the terminal, crowds gathered, waving banners, cheering, and holding signs. "Thank you, Emma. Our little hero. Courage knows no age." The story of the 6-year-old pilot was spreading like wildfire, capturing hearts and imaginations across the globe. Even seasoned pilots expressed disbelief. One veteran, speaking to a journalist, said, "I've flown for decades. I've faced turbulence, engine failures, storms, and emergencies, but nothing compares to what this little girl accomplished. Incredible focus, incredible courage. It's historic." As the media continued covering the story, Emma remained quiet beside her mother, absorbing the gratitude and awe. She had saved hundreds of lives, defied expectation, and become a symbol of courage beyond her years. Yet, she remained humble, more concerned with the people she had saved than the attention she was receiving. But even as the accolades poured in, one thought lingered in her mind. The pilot had survived, the plane had landed. But what would come next? What would happen after the cameras left? Would the world understand the full scope of what a 6-year-old had achieved? And most importantly, how would she carry this experience forward? The answer was beginning to unfold, and the story of Flight 472 and its young hero was far from over. Emma's actions had changed lives, saved hundreds, and inspired a world that had never imagined a child could possess such bravery and focus. And as the cameras continued flashing, reporters scribbled notes, and the crowds cheered, one undeniable truth remained. Emma was no longer just a 6-year-old girl. She was a hero, a miracle, and a symbol of hope for everyone who had witnessed or heard of her incredible courage. But even in this newfound recognition, one question remained unspoken in everyone's mind. Could anyone, even a world of adults, ever fully comprehend the mind, the courage, and the resolve that had guided a 6-year-old to control a plane and save hundreds of lives at 15,000 feet? The world would soon find out. The morning sun spilled across the tarmac, glinting off the fuselage of Flight 472. Emma sat in the terminal, small hands folded on her lap, her mother by her side, as reporters and cameras circled like a storm of curiosity and awe. The previous night's chaos had transformed into global fascination. News outlets across continents broadcast her story, headlines screaming her courage, photos capturing her tiny frame at the controls, videos replaying her calm, determined face as she guided the plane to safety. Emma's mother whispered, "You changed the world yesterday, Emma. Do you understand that?" Emma shook her head. She had acted out of instinct, focus, and the guidance of the professionals who had spoken to her over the radio. She had never imagined fame or attention. All she had wanted was to keep the plane steady, to protect the passengers she couldn't see individually but knew were counting on her. Passengers from Flight 472 were arriving at the terminal, each clutching a small token of gratitude. A hug, a tearful thank you, a small drawing from a child who had witnessed the miracle. One elderly man approached, his voice shaking. "Miss Emma, you saved my life, my wife's life, everyone's lives. You have no idea how grateful we are." Emma blinked, overwhelmed by the emotion, and whispered, I just wanted everyone to be safe." A flight attendant knelt beside her, eyes glistening with tears. "You did more than just keep us safe, Emma. You inspired everyone here. I've worked in aviation for 20 years and I've never seen courage like yours." Outside, the media frenzy escalated. Drones hovered, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. Live broadcasts covered every angle, footage of Emma guiding the plane, interviews with passengers, expert analyses of her calm and effective handling of the aircraft. Aviation authorities were issuing statements praising her bravery. Psychologists weighed in on her extraordinary composure under extreme pressure. Social media had erupted, with millions sharing, tweeting, and posting. The 6-year-old pilot who saved 150 lives. A child's courage defies imagination. Miracle on Flight 472. Even seasoned pilots expressed disbelief. One veteran, speaking live on television, said, "I've faced emergencies, storms, engine failures. Nothing compares to the composure and focus of this child. She didn't panic. She followed procedures, adapted quickly, and ensured everyone survived. It's historic." Emma's mother brushed back her daughter's hair, whispering, "They're calling you a hero, Emma, a hero." Emma's wide eyes reflected the chaos around her. She had never thought of herself that way. She had only thought of keeping the plane steady, listening carefully, and not letting anyone get hurt. Now, she realized that her bravery had rippled outward, touching countless lives, inspiring awe and gratitude. Airport officials approached, formally presenting Emma with a small medal of recognition. "For exceptional bravery and skill under extraordinary circumstances, you have saved countless lives. This medal honors your courage." Emma accepted it quietly, her small fingers gripping the ribbon tightly. She felt a mixture of pride, exhaustion, and disbelief. She was 6 years old. She had saved Flight 472, navigated an aircraft, and now the world was acknowledging her heroism. As Emma and her mother prepared to leave the terminal, passengers continued to wave, shout their thanks, and offer smiles of admiration. Children clutched tiny toys and drawings for her. Adults shook their heads in wonder. The story of a child saving lives had transcended disbelief, touching the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it directly or through the endless media coverage. Outside, crowds gathered, holding banners and signs. "Thank you, Emma. Our miracle pilot. Courage has no age." People of all ages were drawn to her story, and Emma could feel the energy and gratitude radiating from them. Her small hand in her mother's felt the pulse of admiration, fear transformed into wonder. Meanwhile, experts debated how such composure was possible in a child so young. Psychologists explained her focus as a combination of intense training from her simulator book, innate calmness, and the adrenaline-fueled drive to act decisively. Aviation authorities hailed the incident as unprecedented, a miracle that might never be repeated. Emma, however, thought simply of the passengers. Their safety had been her mission, not fame or recognition. And yet the world's response was undeniable. She had become a symbol, a story that transcended age, nationality, and expectation, a reminder that courage could come from the smallest, most unlikely places. The captain, now fully conscious and recovering in the hospital, sent a video message expressing his gratitude. "To the brave young girl who saved us all, I owe you my life and the lives of everyone on this plane. You are a hero beyond words." Emma's mother held her close, tears streaming. "Do you understand now, Emma? Everyone sees what you did." Emma nodded, a small smile forming. She was tired, exhausted from the ordeal, but a quiet pride warmed her chest. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the impossible, and she had succeeded. She had saved lives and in doing so inspired a world. Even as news outlets continued broadcasting, the passengers' videos and interviews flooded social media. Hashtags went viral: Flight 472 hero, 6-year-old pilot, miracle on Flight 472. Experts, celebrities, and ordinary citizens alike expressed admiration. People were sharing the story not just as news, but as inspiration, a reminder that courage and focus could defy expectation. As Emma walked through the terminal, she saw people whispering her name, pointing and smiling. Some children stared in awe, dreaming of being brave like her. Adults nodded in silent respect. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had become more than just a passenger on a plane. That day she had become a symbol of hope, bravery, and the extraordinary potential within the smallest of us. Later, in a quiet room away from the cameras, Emma's mother knelt beside her. "Emma, do you know what you did?" Emma shook her head, eyes wide. "You saved lives. You faced what no one expected you to face. You showed courage that adults spend years trying to master. People around the world are talking about you. You are a hero." Emma considered this, still processing. She thought of the turbulence, the alarms, the voices on the radio, the lights of the runway, and the faces of passengers. And she realized she had done exactly what she had needed to do. She had acted, focused, and saved lives. Her mother held her tightly. "And tomorrow, the world will still be talking about you." Emma nodded slowly, a quiet sense of peace settling over her. She had faced the impossible, and the world had witnessed it. She had learned that courage was not about size, age, or experience, but about focus, determination, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the terminal and the planes outside, Emma's story had already reached millions. Social media exploded with admiration, interviews continued, and the world marveled at a child who had performed an adult's task with calm precision under unimaginable pressure. And somewhere deep inside, Emma knew that the lesson she had learned that day, about courage, focus, and responsibility, would stay with her forever. She had flown a plane, she had saved lives, and she had shown that sometimes the smallest among us are capable of the most extraordinary feats. The applause, the cameras, and the admiration would follow her forever. But in her heart, Emma felt only the quiet pride of a child who had faced fear, acted with courage, and succeeded against all odds. And as the world continued to celebrate her heroism, one truth remained undeniable: courage, focus, and determination know no age, and miracles can come in the smallest packages, sometimes even 6 years old.